Hey everybody, it's John Myers from Write Better Together. We interrupt whatever you're watching to tell you about something. Look everybody, it's Emily Brooks.
Hello, John Myers.
Hey.
Our book, Write
Yes.
Anyway,
Yeah, I know that
Giving
book.
Yourself Permission to Write No Matter What, is now
Yes.
available on Amazon.
We were the right experts to write this book, weren't we?
We were experts. You can get the book in digital and paperback. And if you're interested in learning about how you can write anyway, but you're not sure if you want to buy the book, you can get a sample through the link in our show notes.
Wow.
It's a really good sample too. It's got the introduction, it's got 2 chapters. So you'll already get something out of it by doing that. And then you'll also be part of our newsletter. So you get updates to whenever we publish a new podcast, whenever we have community announcements, like if we might do a webinar in the future. So you'll be up to date.
A free sample that will lead to a free newsletter that will tell them about a free webinar.
And if you do happen to buy our book, we would love to hear about it. We love feedback. We would love for you to share a review on Amazon so that other people can find it.
It talks directly to you,
it
the
does.
listener.
We intentionally edit it that way.
With you in mind. Welcome everybody to Write Better Together. Hey, look everybody, it's Emily Brooks.
Hello, John Myers.
What are we going to be talking about today?
What are you laughing at?
Because normally you give us quite the list and there's only going to be one thing on quite the list. So we've decided, so we have a full episode and we have afterthoughts and then we have commercials. Those are basically the 3 things we do. Well, we have this new thing now, listeners, viewers, where it's part 2 of an interview that you don't have to go on Patreon and pay for. And although there will be those as well, they're full episodes as far as the interview is concerned, and it's all new content. And we want to involve you because the whole thing is made for you. And so it's just shorter. So quite the list will have one thing, and it's about you, people.
Yes. So we're going to share the rest of our episode with Lucy V. Hay. So
Part
our
2.
interview with her. Before we do that, we're going to have viewer responses.
This one was from a professor. Emily's going to read it and then I'll respond to it. From a professor at a state college. I almost said community college. I don't remember if it's a community college or a state college. In Minnesota, in Mankato. I love Minnesota, by the way. So Emily, what does it say? What does Thomas have to say?
So he did a post about how he uses a landline, and then he said he puts on his syllabus to avoid contacting him by cell phone. And he said, do you use older technology? If so, which kind? Which, that's just such a great question. So John Myers, you responded to him just like he responded to us on our video.
Yes, I told him that we had a class Facebook page that it originally started to be their vocabulary words, and rather than put them on note cards that I got to look at every day, they shared them with each other. They had 5 note card or 5 vocabulary words every week. But then it turned into everything. It became the collection spot for anything that they did with a video. They use it on their they're on spring break and they're like, oh, John Myers will think this is funny, and they would share it like with the whole class. And in any given semester, there would be 5 classes using the same page, and so 200 could see what 300 was sharing, and 100 could see what 200 was sharing, and it became its own community, and it took on a life of its own.
So, are you saying that Facebook is old technology?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. When I introduce it at the beginning of the semester, so they don't really say that in 100, like the 19-year-olds, 18, 19-year-olds, they don't really say that. They're just like, okay, I don't have it, but I'll get it. And
yeah.
But by the time they're in 300 and they're juniors and seniors, they're like, Facebook, that's for 50-year-old gym teachers. Yeah. Someone actually said that to me. And I'm like, well, surprise, you're a 50-year-old gym teacher now because you're going to use it.
That's awesome. So then he this is funny. He said, wow, John, most of my students are on Facebook even as I'm lecturing, which I'm sure we can all relate to.
Nope.
That's awesome to know. I'm not the only one using multi-modality to teach. Keep
Yes,
up the podcast and stay gold.
that was great from Professor Tom. Um,
I love the stay gold reference.
yeah, that's good too.
Classic.
But you said that's something we can all relate to. I don't have phones in my classroom, so I don't have that problem. And
There you
and
go.
so and never have, never did. And now cities or school districts are starting to not allow phones in the classroom.
Wow.
I did that 8 years ago. And I was a trendsetter.
Nice. I wanted to ask him if he's listening, and maybe I should just put this on the Instagram page. What other forms of multimodality is he using?
Oh, that's a good
Right?
one. Yeah. So ask him that question through
If
our Instagram page.
like we had Hunter on and she said she has her students make websites. So there's lots
Yeah,
of
yeah,
different
yeah.
ways that you can have students create things and do something a little different than just writing an essay. So I'm really curious to know that from him.
One of our former coworkers, when she does an annotated bibliography, it's actually a web page so that you can have links and
Oh, cool. Yeah.
pictures and things like that.
That's
Um,
cool.
I attempted it one semester and it went okay. It wasn't a failure, but it needed fine tuning, and then
Mm,
I never I never tried it again. And
yeah.
but I also was using younger students than what she was using, but it was okay.
I also think this professor has a YouTube channel, and so we can share that in the show
Yeah,
notes.
and his Instagram, he's overseas right now teaching
Oh,
something. I don't
wow.
know. I
Cool.
don't know what. The reason that even though Facebook's an old technology, the reason we use it is because it's it builds community if you're not going to get on TikTok, right? And you can't really build community on Insta because people don't comment back and forth on there.
Yeah.
So
I
that's
prefer
just the
things like
place.
Discord or Slack, but Facebook's a good option because it's so accessible to people. They don't have to download a new app, they don't have to do anything like that.
Well, I heard on the internet that I was watching the internet and Emily Brooks said we'll have a Discord someday after we get our
Yes,
Patreon,
people, we'll have a Discord one day.
but no Discord in the Discord.
No, not allowed.
Only
No Discord allowed.
only like-minded thoughts.
Only people exactly like us.
Yes.
We'll create a bubble.
Yes. Come into our bubble. All right.
All right, here is the rest of our conversation with Lucy B. Hay.
And that's one of the first things they teach you on the psych ward is everything you're feeling right now is true for you right now. I mean, one of my psychotic episodes, I was convinced that the people that stole Madeleine McCann were going to steal my baby at the time,
Hmm.
because my daughter was born on the same month. She had the same pajamas and she had the same toy at the time as Madeleine McCann. So she also looked as a toddler quite like her, very cute, little white girl, short hair. And I was so mentally ill at the time, I was absolutely convinced that someone was going to steal her. And I was basically locking down all the windows, patrolling, going round the house, making sure nobody could get in, all of this kind of stuff. And I remember going, and yet at the same time, I felt like I was being stupid as well, because I sort of knew in that one that I was being OTT, but I couldn't stop myself from doing it either. And so when I ended up seeing the kind of emergency psychiatrist about that one, I remember he was the first one that kind of validated me ever, because whenever I'd had, severe anxiety attacks where I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I couldn't stop being kind of OTT about security, all that kind of stuff. All the people in my life at the time had said, just calm down, stop being
Yeah.
ridiculous, you're being stupid, you're being this, you're being whatever. And never once asked me a question, why are you feeling like this? Never. But they wanted to tell me how wrong I was, how bad I was, all of this kind of stuff. And he was the very first person that ever validated me, because I came in and I said, my daughter looks like Madeleine McCann. I think she's going to get stolen, and I know it's stupid. I said it all in one, and I said it all in one breath. And he went, wow, that must be really frightening.
Hmm.
And I went, pardon? And I started crying because no one had ever said to me and empathized with me ever until that point.
Wow.
And I was 26 years old, you know? Because whenever anybody had empathized with me before that point, it was always for a reason that benefited them in some way. So basically, they were buttering me up. So
Yeah.
any need that I had or any issue that I had, was not real. Everything they felt was true and real. Everything I felt was a lie or an exaggeration at best. So yeah, that was a really, really kind of strong moment in my history. I can remember it really, really clearly. And I remember that psychiatrist, and I never saw him again. But because he was just an emergency on-call doctor, and for him to say, wow, oh, it must be really scary, not, oh, let's reframe it, let's do this, like a lot of psychiatrists do. He saw that I was in crisis, and he empathized with me, and it was so powerful. Sometimes you just need someone to go, wow, it must be scary inside your head, because for some of us it's so frightening you want to die. It's that bad. But people too often go, oh, you're exaggerating, or oh, you're looking for attention. There's a meme that goes around Facebook that says, a psychiatrist says, was talking at this university about various, patients in crisis. And the person who tweeted said that she put up her hand and said, don't you worry that they're looking for attention? And the psychiatrist turned to her and said, are they looking for attention or are they looking for support?
Hmm.
I mean, wow, that is a
Yeah.
powerful reframe right there.
Yeah. And all that, empathy that you just described is, I think, so important for us to know, even with friends who are dealing with mental health issues, and being able to respond to that. Because it is something that, that's why we have people who are trained to respond to that, who you pay to respond to it well. But I think even as friends and family members, that's a really great tool that you just taught us, a really great way to respond to people.
I think sometimes that we want to fix things for people,
Yeah.
and we can't. We can't. I mean, I remember in the early days of my marriage, and that was around the time that I had the baby, and I was behaving in a very erratic fashion, and my poor husband didn't know anything about mental health. He's never struggled with his mental health. He's never struggled with his mental health, and he was brought up in an environment where they didn't talk about feelings. So he was like doubly disabled. We've discovered later on during my journey that actually it turns out he's got autism as well. So he really didn't understand feelings in the classic sense of the word, because that's just not all autistic people are like that, obviously. But for him, that is true. He values safety and serenity and just being very middle of the road in terms of his emotions. If he feels very emotional, high or low, that it freaks him out. That's just who he is, and that's fine. So in those early days, he tried to fix things for me all the time, and it made it worse. And now he knows, if I do have any issues, and I had quite a bad dip last year. I had a dip during the pandemic as well. But because I've been taught a lot of strategies by, my journey, I was able to kind of hold it on. And just recently, I could feel myself unraveling a little bit, untethering a little bit. And I was able to go back and do a meds review and kind of recalibrate my prescription and all that kind of stuff. But now in those scenarios, he doesn't try and fix things for me. He just sits with me, and I will often do massive epic rants when I'm not feeling good. And before, he'd be like, oh, okay, we've got, this is clearly a big problem. We've got to fix it. But now he just listens to my rant and I feel heard. And he'll say to me, do you want to vent or do you want me to fix it?
Yeah.
And 9 times out of 10, I just need to rant. I just need to get that feeling out of myself. And sometimes those words are not nice. You know, sometimes I do make accusations, and I do this, and say bad things about things and people and stuff like that. But he knows I don't mean it. He knows that I'm allowed to speak my truth of that moment, and it doesn't define me beyond that moment. You know, so, and that's been really helpful, because having your voice stolen when you're young, you have to kind of re-engage with it and understand what your voice even is. And sometimes the things that I say, especially when I'm angry, I sound like a teenage girl. I do. Because that's who I am at that moment. Because I wasn't allowed to say anything as a teenager. And so, of course, it's going to come back through the window of time. You know, sometimes when I say things, and, you know, my middle child, she's 18 now. And very often I think that she's probably more mature than I am because she's had a normal upbringing, you know? And that's been really interesting to see. You know, she's had various usual kind of problems with friendship groups and potential boyfriends and things like that. And I was waiting for her to go off the boil. I was waiting for her to go, oh my God, life will never be the same again. All that kind of stuff. No, she's fine. You know, she's wanted to rant. She's been upset. You know, she's worked through her feelings. You know, she's very emotionally healthy for an 18-year-old. And I really am inspired by her a lot, because I look at her and I think that's who I should have been. She looks just like me. She's the same size as me. You know, I could wear her clothes if I wanted to. You know, because we're so similar. There's just, you know, 25 years between us. You know, and it's really inspiring, and it makes me kind of go, okay, this is why I need to stay engaged with my treatment, so I can be like her and like who I should have been. Because obviously she's a different person. I'm not trying to mold her in any kind of way that I want. I want her to be who she wants to be, but I didn't get to be who I was supposed to be. So she's my nearest my nearest kind of inspiration. And I saw an Instagram reel just recently, and it said, the girls with the messiest childhoods are always given daughters. And I love that. I think it's true, you know, because that way you can see who you were supposed to be. Especially if you were told as a child that, you know, you were so difficult all the time. You know, I had a family member who, every time I said that the children were misbehaving or something like that, you know, just doing normal childhood things, this family member would say, haha, it's payback time because you were such a difficult child. And you were such a problem child. And they'd actually laugh about it and make out that I was so difficult. And then looking at my children and seeing that they're doing exactly what I wanted to do as a child. And actually, they're not hard to love, and they're not difficult, and they're not problem children. They're just children doing their normal thing. And then that kind of breaks your heart all over again, because you're going to go, God, why was I so hard to love? And the answer is, you weren't. You weren't hard to love. It's just you had the wrong caregiver.
Yeah.
You just didn't have your best interests at heart.
I just love everything that you're saying, that you've broken the cycle for your kids, right? Like,
I hope so.
You've given them that love that you needed. And I just think that's really beautiful.
Yeah, I often say that being a teenage mother saved my life. I do believe that. I was a very, very prickly teenage girl. I had lots and lots of problems, and I made a lot of problems for myself as well. I was very promiscuous, drank too much, took too many drugs, you know, fell in with bad crowds, got into petty crime, you name it. I did all of it. I did do all of it. And it's hard to think that so much of that could have been avoided. So much of it could have been avoided, because I honestly thought that children, teenagers were like perilously close to danger 24/7, because that's what I was. I was perilously close to danger 24/7, and I made life more difficult for myself. It's true. But then when you haven't got a baseline of normality, how do you even begin to know what you're doing is right or wrong? I kind of attracted all these very dangerous people into my life because that's what I was used to. I didn't know how to do anything else because that was my normality. I understand now that I was addicted to stress. I was addicted to toxicity. I went looking for it because that was my normal. I remember when I married my husband, and the very first Christmas we were all sitting around, and I remember being bored and thinking that they couldn't love each other very much because they didn't scream at each other constantly. That's what I honestly thought, because my perception was so skewed. I really honestly believe that love hurt, because that's what everything in my surrounding, environment told me. And people kept telling me all the time about how I was high maintenance and a problem and this, that, and the other. So I thought I must be bad, and I didn't deserve any better. And when people say, oh, these teenagers, they don't help themselves. Of course they don't help themselves. They need an adult to come in and say, let me help you. But some of us are so far gone, we can't even accept that help. I look back now and I see multiple, well-meaning and benevolent and even helpful adults reaching out to me. But I, at the time, thought they must have an ulterior motive, that they must want something from me. So I rebuffed every single one of them. So I ended up completely isolated as a young adult. And I didn't know what to do. And that's when I started to reach out to other agencies and organizations, but I didn't know where to start because no one had ever taught me how to be a member of society, how to be a member of community. I lived in the middle of nowhere when I was a child. People think that's an exaggeration. There was no one there. There was just us and a holiday cottage. That's it. Wow. So as a result, how could I be a member of the community? I didn't know where to look. I remember going to a church with my baby in a backpack, and I turned up at the church and I said, I need to speak to someone. And there was this guy there, and he wasn't a priest. I don't know what he was. He was some, like, I don't know. I don't even know anything about churches and religion and all that kind of stuff, because it was just complete. I'm not even an atheist, because my family just thought it was, all of that stuff is irrelevant. So I don't even know anything about it was, but he was something to do with the church, but he wasn't a priest. And he goes, what do you want to talk about? And I said, I don't know, but I just feel like life is just unraveling. And he went, okay, we can talk. And I said, and I remember thinking, I can't tell this man because I was suspicious of men. Let's just say that. I was suspicious of men for a variety of things that have been done to me. I was suspicious of men. And he seemed like a really nice guy, and he seemed like he really wanted to talk to me. And then before I could talk to him, I just turned on my heel and I ran out. I couldn't do it, And it was, so how do you help yourself unless somebody actually kind of comes and gets you and goes, come with me? And of course, nobody did that because I spent so much time on my own. So, and there was no social media, there was no real internet, there was no internet on phones in those days, things like that. It was really hard to find people. I hope that young mums in particular and teenagers who are having those kind of problems where they just don't know where to start now would be, have a better opportunity to kind of Google things and stuff like that. Because, I think social media is very powerful in bringing people together. And even things like Googling, what do I do if blah, 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 is going to lead you to somewhere. Whereas in those days, where do you start? I was so
it's gonna lead them to you, Lucy.
Yeah.
Seriously,
Yeah.
like, I have goosebumps. But that's why you have to keep saying this and saying these things, and that's why this crazy writing podcast will, like, this is why we talk about this stuff, like real life stuff, and not about sentence structure and and things like that. Because this this I don't even know how to say it. This is the life part is the important part, and then the rest, it doesn't matter what your job is. The rest falls into place after you deal with the life stuff. And I'm like so happy that you're not. I'm just so happy for you that you're not the how you were 10 years ago, let alone how you were when a teenager, and to see your children, um uh like, to be inspired by your children. But they learned that from you and your husband, like you modeled for them, so you can see that in there. And so that's going to be Lucy's call to action right now. She's going to tell people to go have children and raise them properly. Right?
No, don't have children unless you really want them. Don't do it. You know, I think there can be a pressure on people to have children because it's the thing that you do.
Yeah.
And
That's a good point.
you know,
Mhm.
I have children because I always wanted children. I always knew that, you know, even as a small little girl, I would have dollies, and I would, you know, they were my babies and things like that. And I love to do that. And I've loved being a mother, and I loved it when they were very small. Having said that, I find babies a little bit boring. They're a bit dull. It's like they don't do anything. You know,
Yeah.
once it gets to kind of toddlerhood, I think my favorite age of all is probably 8, because they are nice and self-sufficient. They do their own thing, but they still want cuddles with mummy. They still want to go on the sofa with you and all that kind of stuff. You know, they're not really independent, but they have a little bit of independence, but also they want to be kind of, you know, snuggly with you. That's my favorite age in terms of childhood. And I'm looking forward to having grandchildren who are that age as well. And I'd like to look after babies as well this time around, because one thing that happened with all 3 of my babies, unfortunately, was terrible things happened in my pregnancies for each and every one of them. So as a result, I wasn't able to enjoy their babyhood,
Yeah.
because I was so worried and so freaked out all the time. You know, the first time I was a teenage mother and I was abandoned. The second time I had a massive psychotic break when I was pregnant. Looking back now, I can see that happened. And then obviously when she was a baby, I thought she was going to be stolen as well. There's a variety of other things that happened around that time. We were in financial crisis as well, and then for the third one, I had cancer. So I didn't 3 children, and I didn't get to enjoy the babyhood of any of them, which
Yeah.
was really tough, and I felt bitter about for a long time. But I've also learned that I can count my blessings as well, because they were all healthy. None of them have got any major problems with or disabilities or anything like that. All of them have done very well for themselves in terms of school, in terms of having friends, in terms of being normal children. And obviously we've had various challenges, and something that happened that was very bad in 2019. But apart from that, everything has been okay. It's just been that mum has almost died multiple times. So obviously, like my eldest child, he had very bad health anxiety for a long time, for obvious reasons, because I nearly died so many times. So as a result, he was worried that he was going to die a lot. And he's, you know, he's had therapy and stuff like that. And, you know, he seems to be leaving that behind now. But as a teenager, that was tough for him. And I felt a lot of guilt, because that was my fault. But, you know, at the end of the day, I couldn't help almost dying. But also at the same time, looking back now, I think, well, if I just walked away sooner, maybe I could have healed quicker and maybe things like cancer and multiple psychotic breaks and stuff like that wouldn't necessarily have happened at a time that was quite tumultuous for him, which, because being a teenager is a tumultuous time just generally, and it was just really bad luck that they coincided, those two things. Because it's not my fault that I almost died, but it's not his fault that I almost died either. And his behavior was very, very bad as a teenager, which kind of created a cycle of problems in the home. And getting over that and rebuilding that relationship and actually getting him to trust me again, it was tough. It was tough, and I felt a lot of guilt about that, because as his mother, I wanted to shield him from all of that, and I think I did a fair job. But at the end of the day, kids are not stupid, and he knew that I was in deep, deep trouble, and he didn't know how to process that, and that created some major friction in the house when he was sort of like 15, 16. It was tough. It was really tough. But at the end of the day, it's like the cliche, isn't it? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I don't think it necessarily does, but I think traumas can inform your ability to see who other people are and what they need, especially if you are a caregiver yourself. At the end of the day, he was, I was the adult, he was the child. And however difficult his behavior was, I had to remember that. And I had to realize that there were reasons he was doing what he was doing. It wasn't because he was ungrateful. It wasn't because he was a problem child. It was because there was chaos in the house. There was chaos in the house, and I wish I could have given him that gift of clarity and healing before I did, but I did eventually, and that's something that's better than nothing.
There you go. Now, how are you going to even top all that with coming up with a call to action? Like, I can't even imagine what you're going to do. But if anyone can do it, you can do it.
Okay, so as a call to action, things we're talking about mental health.
Okay.
Now, are we talking about when I talk about this call to action, this writing prompt? Is it an actual mental health in writing that we're talking about, or is it a mental health of the writer themselves?
I think you could address the mental health of the writers themselves.
Okay.
Like, what are some steps that they could take specifically, or what's something that they can do that they can share with us?
Okay. I think then I'm going to share a prompt that I do with my one-to-one clients quite a lot. Very frequently writers come to me and they're very afraid. Writing is anxiety inducing, and they'll often say to me, I'm afraid that no one's going to read my work, but I'm also afraid that people are going to read my work. You're in that space where you just, there is no good outcome. It just freaks them out the whole time. So one thing that I do with my one-to-one clients a lot, and I've done this with some professional writers who are, quite renowned, actually. People think that the anxiety is only when you're a new writer, and actually it's your whole career. I've done this exercise with people who've been Oscar nominated and BAFTA nominated, or been top of the Amazon charts and stuff like that. And I say, I'm going to ask you one question. What's the worst that can happen? And I get them to make a list.
Wow.
And it's so surprising how many of those fears are, not real, or if they are real, you realize that actually you can cope with that. One that comes up a lot, especially with professional writers, is what if Twitter yells at me?
Oh my goodness.
Because it's really stressful. The thought that you might get ratioed on Twitter is bad. I've been ratioed on Twitter, I don't know how many times. It doesn't actually bother me. I don't care. I grew up in a Facebook flame war in real life, so I don't care about social media drama. I will actually go into Facebook groups, for example, and kick up a lot of what tech bros call comment bombs. I'll drop onto people's and go, no, that's not right because of this. And I'll ruffle feathers on purpose. So because it amuses me, it really does. And I'm, sometimes that's what I do if I'm bored. But for a lot of people, social media drama really stresses them out. So we write it down. So what's the worst thing that can happen in that social media drama? It's like, well, Twitter can yell at me, people can ratio me, people can dox me, people can do this. And it's like, okay, what's the now there's a second question. What's the likelihood of that happening?
Wow.
There's two questions. What's the worst that can happen? What's the likelihood that can happen? And people run out of things to write down very quickly, very, very quickly. And it shows us that what we're afraid of is usually bigger than what it actually is.
And Emily, how do they get their answer to these two questions to us?
So first of all, I want to say this was one of the first exercises that I did when I went to therapy in college. And it is very good. So I love that. And you all can, if you can share that list with us, or you can just share, how did it go? Like, tell us about what that did for you to write those things down. You can respond to those on our Facebook page at Write Better Together Now. When we share this episode, we'll have a post about our call to action, and you can share it there. You can respond and on our actual website in the show notes of this episode at writebettertogether.com/podcast. Or you can respond in the YouTube
David,
comments.
you can put your answers underneath the YouTube video.
If you're David, you can put it in the So respond in YouTube, wherever you share it, we'll find it, and we appreciate all of your responses.
Thank you, Lucy.
And
this was
thank
amazing.
You so much for just sharing your story. And I think we could have a whole episode on just the importance of sharing your story. And I think this is so helpful for so many listeners. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you.
It makes me think of Angela, Maya Angelou. She said the agony of an untold story is just too much. So I'm paraphrasing. And she's absolutely right. If you're forced to not say something, to not share what you feel you need to say, it's so painful. It's so painful.
Yeah, that's an amazing quote and just whole idea. So we really appreciate you, and listeners, we hope that you're inspired to share your stories and to be inspired by others.
Thanks again. That was amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So powerful. I'm glad. First of all, let me say I'm glad you left the call to action in, so people can do the call to action even though you're watching this during a different week. There's no time constraints to doing that call to action. But it's like, so we had your dad on recently, and I wanted to ask him, and I didn't. I wanted to make him cry.
Oh,
not really. He's raised. There's 3 of you or 5 of you? I don't even remember.
There's 4.
There's 4. The average of 3 and 5.
Yeah.
4 of you, all creative in their own way. And that's amazing that he raised, and your mom raised 4 creatives. And that such creativity was not encouraged in Lucy's childhood, nor was it in mine. I want to have a kid so bad. You only get this one chance to raise that kid to be a creative. But I turned out to be a creative, even though it wasn't encouraged. So maybe it's was in well, it is in you anyway because you're made into his image and creator creates creation. And so if you're made in his image, you create because he's a creator.
Yeah, I think it is in everybody. Like, truly, I think everybody has it in them. I think it's stifled a lot, and I think it can even be stifled by yourself if you're insecure. Um, I'm not saying that everybody is like excellent at creating whatever they're creating, but I think that I think we all have a, an innate desire to create something.
Yeah, pulling it back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the episode with Professor Tom, uh, when you get them, when you get first year students who are 18 and 19, the biggest, that's why we spend the whole first week team building. They've never had anyone, there are exceptions, but the majority of them never had anybody that cared about them or never had anybody that um, cared about what they had to say. They never had anyone tell them, hey, you matter. Never. Like they never heard that. And I was one of
Yeah.
those.
Hmm.
When you were growing up, you weren't one of those. You heard that you were important and that you mattered. The more people don't hear today, in the last 8 years or whatever, uh, more people don't hear it than hear it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because this is just like absolutely that's true. On the flip side, I think some parents can put too much pressure on their kids of like, you have to matter, you have to do something important, you have to, I think there's a balance. And we've
I,
talked before on the podcast about how like if I have a kid who's interested in sports, like I'm gonna I'm gonna parent that. I'm gonna nurture that. It's you nurture whatever they're becoming. I think speaking of my parents, one of the ways my dad has described it in the past is looking at what's growing, like what kind of seed are we becoming, like what kind of plant are we becoming, and then nurturing that instead of trying to like force them into being what you want them to be.
I like that. I like your dad.
Me
um,
too.
uh, since this is the number one podcast for sporting information, um, so I like that analogy that you gave with sports, where the parents can push whether it's the arts or sports or creativity. Um, it kind of fits with what I was saying, though. I have had many, can't name any of them, but I have had many star athletes who, at the end of the semester, because they have to do a creative element every Tuesday, right? They're like, I didn't even know I could, like, they hold up their drawings or whatever. I didn't even know I could do this. I've never, like, no one's ever encouraged me to do it. And because they're such low stakes, they get a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
They're just encouraged. And some of them are real good. So there was this one guy who wants to be a senator when he grows up. And that's been his dream since he was 6 years old. We don't ever talk about politics, but he wanted to go into politics. He was super nerd about econ. Like he knew 19-year-old knew econ. What do you call it? It's not a. Is it a science? Is econ a science?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so he knew econ inside and out, and that would be your go-to class expert to ask. But he would make these charts and diagrams that Wes Anderson could have made, and they were just so beautiful. And
Wow.
I had one. I'm like, can I keep that one in my office? I had one in my office,
Wow.
and it was econ statistics because he was giving a presentation, right? But the artwork of it was beautiful, and
Wow.
he's like, no one's ever asked me like or encouraged me to show my artistic side on my charts and graphs, but they really were. So there you go.
I love that. I think that I think what we say to kids matters because one of the things that happens is we'll say, like, oh, you're so athletic. Oh,
Mm.
you're so good at writing. And those things are good to say, right? But I think that it can also pigeonhole people into like, that's the thing that you're good at. You'd be surprised how many people are so multifaceted that they can, they can be athletic and be poets, right?
in our episode with Hunter Little, she had the one student who was like, I didn't even realize this about me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so you hear that all the time. Very
Yeah.
good. Look what you caused, Lucy. You brought all
Yeah.
this conversation out.
So good. Thank you again, Lucy, so much. We really, really loved that conversation. And if our listeners want to hear more conversations like that, they can subscribe to our podcast wherever they're listening. They can share this podcast with their friends and write us a review. We would
Write a
love
review.
you to write a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anywhere you're listening. That helps other people find us.
Here's a little cheat hack too. Here's a hack. Sometimes when your friends like say something, I don't know, let's say your friends are on Facebook or on anything, on YouTube, or are commenting about creativity or whatever, you can take one of our videos and just instead of sharing a meme, just answer them with one of our videos.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to use us as your brain. You don't have to think of a response yourself. Just agree with us and share our video.
Cite us.
Yeah, there you go.
Use us as your source.
Cite us.
All right, everybody. Well, we
couldn't have
done it
without
without you.